What's up guys, Sagi here, and welcome to another Tech Gear Talk. Today I'm going to talk about a camera that I'm super excited for, the M50 Mark II. If you're not new to this channel, you know that I've published a ton of M50 videos. It's one of my favorite cameras to recommend because I think it represents such a great value as an entry-level mirrorless camera. But today I want to talk about what we can expect Canon to include in the long-awaited for M50 Mark II, or maybe they'll call it the M60. I put together a list of features based on the most current leaks and what I think is reasonable to expect from an upgraded M50. And after you watch this video, I'm super interested to know if there's anything else that you think Canon will add to this model. So let's get going. The first thing I think Canon will do is remove the additional crop we see in 4K on the original M50. This is still one of the biggest pain points on the M50 because it makes it quite challenging to get wide-angle 4K footage. The current M50 has a 1.6x crop that all Canon APS-C sensors cameras have, but then when you film in 4K, it applies an additional 1.6x crop, which results in a 2.56 crop. That means that if we take something like the 15 to 45 kit lens and we zoom all the way out to 15 and set the M50 to 4K, we're getting 15 times 1.6 times 1.6, which is essentially a 38mm full frame equivalent field of view. If you're shooting talking head videos and you have enough room, you can probably just move the camera back. But if you're vlogging or you don't have a huge room, this is going to be a real issue. We've already seen this additional crop removed on the M6 Mark II, which makes me think that they'll be able to do that by upgrading the M50 Mark II to the Digic 8 processor. Of course, we saw the Digic X on the 1DX Mark III, but that's a whole different animal here. So do you think it's is it Digit X or Digit 10? I don't know what they're gonna call it. The last thing we need is like another iPhone X, iPhone 10 debacle. So I think it's a Digic X. Let's go with that one. All right, so now let's move on to another expected upgrade, and I'm talking about dual pixel autofocus when filming in 4K. The M50 switches from dual pixel AF to a contrast detection system, which is slower, it's less accurate, and it struggles in low light. This is probably the main reason why I don't shoot 4K with the M50, and why when I do, I mostly use manual focus. Now again, we saw this limitation removed on the M6 Mark II, so I can see it being implemented on the M50 Mark II. I want to mention that I'm not just adding every feature that I would ever want in any camera. I'm actually thinking about what's reasonable for this type of camera based on where it fits in Canon's APS-C mirrorless lineup and for the expected price, which I'll get to later on. Moving on, let's talk about battery life. So one of the absolute biggest complaints about the M50 is battery life. The M50 uses an LPE12 rechargeable lithium-ion battery, and it's rated for 235 shots per charge, and that's when using the EVF or the LCD. There is an eco mode that darkens the LCD almost immediately after taking a picture or even after getting focused, and this helps preserve the battery. It can boost the battery life up to about 370 shots. What I hope is that they figured out a way to use the larger LPE17 battery that we already see on the M6 Mark II, the SL2, and the SL3. The LPE12 battery is at 875 mAh, and the LPE17 is 1040 mAh, which is approximately a 19% increase in capacity. When we couple this with the expected improvements in efficiency due to the Digic 8 processor, we should expect to see a marked increase in battery life. So for example, the SL2 and SL3 use the same battery, but the SL2 is rated for 650 shots and the SL3 is rated for 1070 shots. So hopefully some of that will translate to the M50 Mark II. Before I move on to the next upgrade, if you like what you've seen so far, let me know by giving this video a thumbs up. It helps the video and the channel and lets me know what kind of content you like so I can make more of it. And if this is your first time here, go ahead and hit the subscribe and notification buttons so you can stay up to date on all the latest gear and tutorials. All right, so next I want to talk about the sensor, and I'm really torn here. Like on the one hand, I hope they go with the newer 32.5 megapixel sensor that we saw on the M6 Mark II and the 90D. But on the other hand, the newer T8i still came out with a 24 megapixel sensor, so I'm not sure which way they're gonna go. Right now, if I had to guess, I would say that they're gonna keep the 32 megapixel sensor for the next level up in their APS-C lineup to further differentiate the two levels. There's also some discussion about whether many of the EFM lenses can truly take advantage of this higher resolution sensor, but it's great to see that Canon is also coming out with some additional lenses. From what I know so far, the 5 new EFM lenses are a 15mm f2, a 52mm f2, a 62mm f4 macro, an 18 to 45mm f2.8 to f4, which is going to be a great upgrade over the kit lens because of the much wider maximum aperture, and a 100 to 300 telephoto, which is going to be awesome. It's going to be small and give you so much range. I'll definitely have reviews of all 5 lenses when I come out later this year, so make sure that you have that notification bell turned on. I also have a more detailed review about my favorite lenses for the M50, so if you're interested, go ahead and watch that video up there. Alright, so moving on, there's been some discussion about having IBIS, or in-body image stabilization, included with the next model. The current M50 has digital image stabilization, where the sensor image is being cropped and then rotated to compensate for camera shake. Adding IBIS would mean that the sensor would be able to actually move in camera to offset some of that movement. So this does a couple of things. First, it provides better results, and then second, it adds stabilizations to lenses that don't have any, like the Sigma 16, 30, and 56mm. Ultimately, that would make the M50 Mark II an even more attractive option to vloggers who tend to shoot handheld a lot. But I wonder if they'll be able to maintain the current form factor with this added functionality, not to mention what it would do to the price. If I were betting, I would bet against this being added, but I also don't gamble, so I don't really know what that means. I just think that they need to keep enough separation between this level and the M6 Mark II level. And I just mentioned form factor there, so I'd like to discuss that for a minute. And I really hope that they add a dial to the directional pad, just like we saw with the M6 Mark II, so that we can control aperture and shutter speed without having to use the up button in the directional pad to toggle between the two options. This would still give the M6 Mark II the edge because it has 3 dials, one for aperture, one for shutter speed, and one for ISO. But at the same time, it would greatly improve the ergonomics for the M50 Mark II. Of course, I expect them to keep the viewfinder and perhaps give us a slightly better one. And naturally, the fully articulating touchscreen is not going to go anywhere. It's a super versatile implementation and allows you to have the screen facing you whether you're above, below, to the side, or in front of the M50. One thing that'll be interesting to see is whether they're able to move the 3.5mm mic input to where it doesn't interfere with the fully articulating touchscreen functionality. And that brings me to some audio upgrades that I'd like to see on the new model. The first should definitely be there, and that's the ability to see audio levels when you're in movie mode. Right now, you can only see levels when you go to the main menu, sound recording. You can see the levels there and set them, modify some of the audio related features, but that interface is disabled once you start recording. So there are 2 issues there. The first is that you can't monitor audio in real time, so you can't actually just see the levels to make sure that they're not too low and not too high. And the second option is that even if you could, like you can on the SL3, you can modify them while recording, so it doesn't really allow you to make adjustments on the fly. So with the SL3, even though I can see the level while I'm recording, I still have to stop the recording in order to make adjustments, which is obviously not ideal because it means every time I need to make an adjustment, I need to start a new clip. With the M6 Mark II, you can always see the levels and you can adjust them during the recording, which is perfect. Now, as far as the headphone jack, I can't see them adding that to the M50 Mark II. It'd be great, honestly, I can't see that happening. Moving on, the next feature that I fully expect to see is a clean HDMI output. Right now, the M50 doesn't have a clean HDMI output, and that means that the only way to get a clean image out of the camera is to use manual focus. If you want to stream with the M50, you can do that for free at a lower resolution using the Canon webcam utility, or at 1080p by using paid software. Another issue with this feed is that there's no audio being sent from the camera to the computer. With the clean HDMI output like what we get on the M6 Mark II or the SL3, we get the full functionality of the camera with autofocus while sending out clean 1080p or 4K signal to either an external recorder or a capture card. This will give us the highest quality streaming that this new camera will be able to produce as long as we use a capture card, at which point this will become one of the best budget mirrorless cameras for streaming. Now, being able to record externally also helps us get around the 30-minute recording limit by using something like the Atomos Ninja 5. Now, this is a great feature to be able to take advantage of if you film long-form content for YouTube like this, or if you film lectures or presentations, religious services, or any type of long events. Moving on, another feature that I would absolutely love to see is 1080p at 120 frames per second. This is something that we got on the 90D and the M6 Mark II, but with no autofocus. Now, if Canon can add this feature at this lower price point, this camera will just fly off the shelves because so many people like slow motion. 120 frames per second when slowed to 30 or 24 frames per second will give you slow motion by a factor of 4 or 5 times. This is because the 120 frames from each second recorded at 120 frames per second can be stretched out to 4 seconds of playtime at 30 frames per second or 5 seconds of playtime at 24 frames per second. Now, speaking of frames per second, let's talk a little bit about burst or continuous shooting. That's a feature that lets you hold down the shutter on the camera and it will just keep on firing. It's great for any type of fast-moving subject like pets running around, kids that won't stay still, sports, and wildlife. Now, the M50 can shoot at 10 frames per second, and a camera like the M6 Mark II with a Digic 8 processor can shoot at up to 14 frames per second, even though it's at a higher resolution. And it will be interesting to see how high the M50 Mark II will go. Of course, the more frames you can capture per second, the more options you have to pick from later on. I also expect to see improvements when it comes to the buffer size. So right now, the M50 buffer can store up to 10 raw images or 33 JPEGs before the camera has to slow down its burst rate. And I expect both of these numbers to at least double with the new model. The last feature I want to bring up, and then we'll get to the price, is vertical video. I fully expect the next model to have support for vertical video output. This will make life easier when creating content for Instagram or TikTok or any mobile-first platform. Having clips tagged as vertical saves you from having to rotate each clip separately when it comes to editing, and it creates a much more seamless workflow. All right, so let's talk about the price. Now, obviously, Canon has to be very intentional with how they price this next model. They need to make it high enough to separate it from the original M50, at least until they discontinue it, but low enough where it doesn't cannibalize M6 Mark II sales. I'd like to see it priced around $700 to $750 so it competes directly with the Sony a6100, but let me know what you think. Do you think that would be a fair price? I think that would make the most sense because they would be pretty comparable models. All right, so these are my projections for the Canon M50 Mark II, and I'd love to know what you think. Are there other features that you think Canon will add to this model? And let's try to keep it realistic. For example, I can't see them adding C-Log to a camera like this. That would definitely hurt sales for their higher end models, and most users of this camera would never use that option. I really hope you enjoyed this M50 Mark II rumor wishlist video, and since it's my first of this type, I would definitely appreciate some feedback. If you liked it, please let me know by giving this video a thumbs up. Tweet it, share it, and if you haven't yet, join the community by hitting the subscribe and notification buttons. You can always find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Tech Gear Talk. You know what I always say? Buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck, and see you soon. Which one do you like? Do you like this one or this one? I like this one. Wish it had a viewfinder. I also really like this. I don't know. I think I like this one. I think I use the M6 Mark II more. I use them more, but I really like the M50. Yeah, I'm not really helping. I like both of them.